Chapter 11. A Crow for the Carriage. The Igby children stood frozen. 4 more fangs surrounded them with swords drawn. "Try to run if you like," Slarb said with a smile that exposed his long, sharp teeth. "It's a long way down to the sea. I'm sure those ghastly dragons would love a few plump victuals after their silly show, don't you think?" 2 of the fangs seized Tink and Lily. In a deep, gravelly voice, one of them said, "What do you want we should do with 'em, Slarb? Toss 'em over, or put 'em in the pen?" Slarb considered the first option for a moment. His purplish, forked tongue flicked over his fangs as his cold eyes went from the children to the cliffs a few feet away. Jenner looked over Slarb's shoulder at the dissipating crowd, praying that Poto and his mother would spot them, wherever they were. But not one of the people in the crowd was looking their way, and as far as he could tell, none of them was Poto or Nia. Jenner was furious that he had allowed himself to be distracted from finding them. They probably would have been better hidden in the crowd anyway. "Commander Norm told me to bring 'em in, but this cliff is so close. These humans are so very smelly. Eh, Brock?" His tongue flitted a few inches from Jenner's face. There was no way out. 1 fang would be hard to escape from. 5 would be impossible. It was best to stay calm and hope Slarb followed orders. Being thrown in jail and then being sent away in the black carriage was horrifying, but it was better than being tossed into the sea right there and then. Jenner noticed that Nugget was long gone. So much for the loyal dog, he thought, just as Slarb's fist slammed into the side of his head, knocking him to the ground. It was the first time he'd ever been hit so hard. He'd had his share of fights with Tink, but they were nothing to the explosion of pain he felt while he moaned and struggled to his feet. Slarb snorted. "Let that be a lesson, boy. Touch me again and I'll eat you alive." He stopped over to Lily, grabbed a fistful of her wavy blonde hair, and jerked her head back. "And the same goes for you, stenchy little girl," he said, and he pushed her to the ground beside Jenner. Tink wrenched free from the fang who was holding him and swung a fist at Slarb, but Slarb brushed the punch aside and rammed his knee into Tink's stomach. Tink doubled over and collapsed, gasping for air. Slarb bent over him and drew his knife. With one greenish scaled hand, he held Tink's head flat against the ground while he ran the point of the blade softly down Tink's cheek. "And you scrawny little thing," he growled. "Remember Slarb with this." He flipped the dagger in the air, caught it by the blade, and cracked Tink in the head with the pommel. Jenner and Lily cringed at the sound it made as Tink cried out, then clenched his teeth and fought back the tears as a little patch of blood emerged from his hairline. At the sight of the blood, the fangs became agitated, hissing and snorting like dinner had just been served. "Bring them with me," Slarb said, turning away. The brothers were yanked to their feet and shoved forward. Lily tried to stand, but her poor twisted leg buckled beneath her. She crumpled to the ground. Jenner bent to help her up, but the fang named Brock stepped between them with a growl. "I'd let the little stinker alone if I was you," he said. "She can't walk without help," Jenner said hotly, and Brock bared his fangs at him. "Let the boy help his little crippled sister, you fool. Unless you want to carry the smelly thing all the way back to the jail," Slarb hissed. Brock's nose twitched. His scaly lips curled with disgust while he regarded Lily. He relented, and Jenner helped her up again. The side of Jenner's face was pounding from the blow, and above Tink's ear an egg-sized knot was growing. Lily cried as she limped along, looking around for Nugget. By now most of the tourists had made their way to either the only inn for dinner, or to their camp at the opposite edge of town to cook something they'd bought at the market that day. A few people were milling around the lamplit streets. When they saw the procession of 5 armored fangs carrying torches and prodding the 3 frightened children along, they averted their eyes and shuffled out of the way. Commander Norm was a fat, scaly thing with sagging eyes and yellow, crooked fangs. He lazed on the front porch of the jail almost all the time, sharpening a dagger and eating whatever happened to be on hand. Jenner's mind was racing. They had gotten themselves into a hayload of a mess. Commander Norm's decisions were as swift as they were ruthless, and for all he knew, they would find themselves in the black carriage on their way to Fort Lamadron before the sun rose. They were shoved up the few steps onto the jailhouse stoop, where Commander Norm was leaning back in the chair, sharpening his dagger in the shadows. Well, get him inside, he said without looking up. They were marched into a lamp-lit room and past a desk littered with fish bones. On the wall facing the desk, a crude, circular target had been painted, and a score of daggers were jutting out of the wall. Whoever had thrown them was disturbingly accurate. Slarb pushed the children into another room that was as dark as a grave. The light of Slarb's torch revealed 3 barred cells, the floors strewn with hay and filth. He lifted a ring of keys from the wall, opened the barred door, and shoved the children into the cell. With a look of great satisfaction, he locked the door, replaced the keys, and left. Tink and Lily curled up next to Janner on the floor as if it were cold, though it was quite stuffy. "Let me see, Tink," Janner said, taking his brother's head in his hands. He parted Tink's hair and squinted in the darkness at the lump. He had no idea what he was looking for. "It doesn't seem too bad," he said, trying to sound much older than he was. "How's that face of yours?" Tink said. "It'll be fine," Janner said, wincing as he touched the bruise forming on his cheek. The brothers turned to Lily. "You going to be okay?" Janner asked. "This was all my fault," she said, wiping her nose with her forearm. "I'm so sorry I got us into this mess." "What happened back there anyway?" Janner asked. "While you were watching the handyball game, I was throwing a stick to Nugget near the lawn, behind the crowd. A thwop plopped out of a tree right in front of him, and Nugget ran after it. I followed them, and before I knew it, I was all the way back here on Main Street. I saw Nugget chase the thwop into the alley. When he turned the corner, he tripped that thing." "Slarb?" Tink asked. "Yes, I think so. And that thing, Slarb, he picked up Nugget, was about to bite him, so I kicked it in the shin." Lily said this as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You kicked a thing?" both boys repeated. "Well, what was I supposed to do?" "I don't know, but that's about the dumbest thing I've ever heard," Janner said. "And the bravest," Tink said. Lily sat with her head down, her long hair almost touching the dirty floor. "And the bravest," Janner agreed after a moment. Lily sniffed and wiped her nose. "Hush," Tink said with a hand on her back. "It wasn't your fault anyway. It was that dog of yours," he said, trying to be funny. Tink regretted it as soon as it came out of his mouth. Lily sobbed. "It's not like him to run away like that," she said, and buried her face in Tink's chest. "What if one of those awful things kicked him over the cliff?" "Listen," Janner said, "be glad that Nugget isn't in here with us. We're the ones who are in trouble. Either we're about to have the snot beat out of us, or we're going to be shipped away to Dang. I'd rather not see Dang, or the Castle Throg, or Nag the Nameless this week, so let's hope for torture." When the door to their cell opened, in wobbled Commander Norm with Slarb at his side. Janner, Tink, and Lily stood and stiffened as Norm regarded them with his greenish, scaly arms folded and resting on his large gut like if they were resting on a table. He looked them over with black, droopy eyes. "Yes, Commander," Slarb said, "these are the ones. And these children somehow left you unconscious in an alley." Norm turned to Slarb with a sneer. "They must be valiant warriors indeed to best 2 armed fangs of Dang," he said, his voice deep and wet sounding. Like bubbling mud, Janner thought. "Well, sir, it would seem that you are curiously incompetent if it takes 5 of you to bring in 3 children. I sit on my green rump all day long, growing fatter with every rat I gobble, and I believe I could whip this rabble with my eyes closed. You do have fangs, don't you, Slarb, you tadpole? And you say these stones came from nowhere, do you? A little rock hits your skull, and you sleep like babies in the dirt. Did some old mommy come tuck you in?" Slarb tried again and again to interject, but Norm gained momentum as he spoke until Slarb stood silent, his pale green cheeks puffing. Norm had his hand on the hilt of his dagger, itching for an excuse to draw it, and bury it in Slarb's soft belly. Slarb gave him no opportunity, however. "I beg your pardon, Commander. My incompetence is inexcusable," Slarb said with his head bowed low. Norm grunted, satisfied with groveling. He turned to go with a snort, unaware that Slarb bared his fangs at his back. "What about the children, sir?" The fat fang stopped in the doorway and looked over his shoulder at the Igby children on the floor of the cell. He considered them for a moment with his droopy black eyes. What would you like to do with them? Slarb grinned maliciously. Commander, if it would please you, I'd like to torture them. The whips, perhaps? Janner's heart pounded. Tink squeezed Lily tighter. Would you now? Norm said coldly. In that case, don't touch them. If you tried to whip them, they'd probably best you anyway. We'll have them sent to Dang tonight. He laughed as he turned away. Send a crow for the carriage.